everyone. My name is Mary Robinette Kowal. I am the author of Calculating Stars, The Fated Sky, The Relentless Moon, which I don't have a copy of on me, and The Martian Contingency, which will be out on March 18th. And I am here to answer all of your questions. If there are any questions that you have for me, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, this is going to be a very awkward hour.
I have a question about polio epidemic. It's a couple of questions actually. So this was my third reread
Mhm.
of the books. The second one was during lockdown, and I had forgotten about the polio epidemic, and that was bad. Like it was super triggering. So this third read was really fascinating. But I'm curious about how you reread it, if you reread it with us, how that rang with you. But there was something that I thought I remembered about how the polio outbreak happened that I don't remember coming across in the third reread. That it had something to do with gravity and the live virus allowing the polio to propagate in all of the recently vaccinated people. But I'm wondering if I like spaced out this reread and missed it or made it up when I read it during lockdown in like whatever fugue state was going.
So book 3 came out in July of 2020. So Relentless Moon came out. Oh, hello, Elsie. Out July of 2020. And I remember writing something. It wasn't a this is why it happened. It was a maybe because of the way the genes are expressing themselves in microgravity, that there may have been a mutation that was more virulent. I remember having that conversation as a thing that could happen. The thing that I don't remember is if that was about polio or if that was about the illness in Fated Sky, because I remember having this conversation with Shana Grifford, who's a flight surgeon. And it is something that happens that we see in actual space, that genes express themselves differently. 100% sure at this point if it is the microgravity, if it's cosmic radiation, or if it's just stress, which is why I'm like, I don't think I would have put it in there as a this is why, but I might have put it in there as a speculation. And there's also a chance that I have talked about it previously, and what you're remembering is an interview. How was NASA Space Camp? NASA Space Camp was amazing. I went in January with some people who were as part of a Kickstarter award for the Silent Spaces anthology or collection. And it was so much fun. We got to play with the the lunar gravity chair, which was really cool. And I got to do the multi-axis trainer, which I'd done before, but this time I got to see my dad do it, and it was delightful. I have not been in the training pool. Have you been in the training pool, or are Elma's experience based on the astronauts you interview? I have not been in the training pool, but I did get to go see a full development run in the neutral buoyancy lab. The way it goes is that like this. Kjell Lindgren, who's an astronaut, noted that I was going to be in town and said, if you come in a day early, I'm doing a dev run and you're welcome to attend. And then he said, but it's going to be really long. It's going to take all day, and it'll be really boring. You probably don't want to stay all day. To which I replied, hey, Chell, you know how I'm a professional puppeteer, and if you're ever in New York and you want to go visit Sesame Street, let me know. But you probably aren't going to want to stay all day because it'll be really boring. And he acknowledged that I had a point. I did stay all day. It was not boring, even a little bit. It was really interesting. But what I noticed about it was when they got out of their spacesuits, they were doing these motions with their hands. And I was like, I know that feeling from when I'm working a puppet that is too stiff. I know like all of the stretches that they were doing with their arms are stretches that I do to prepare for a heavy puppet, and that I do after I've had a heavy puppet. When they did the debrief, they were still in their LCVG, the liquid cooling and ventilation garment. And anyone who had been in a spacesuit had an ice pack on their shoulder. So it is based on talking to people But what I try to do is to extrapolate from knowledge that I have. So I know what it's like to be in something that has restricted movement. I know what it's like to work something where your hands hurt, but you have to keep going. I used to be a lifeguard. So I've never done neutral buoyancy, I've never done scuba diving, but I know how things behave in the water. So there was a lot of extrapolating. And then Faded Sky in particular, I handed the book to Katie Coleman, who's also an astronaut. And when she was giving me notes on it, there were a couple of places where I just took her note and basically put it verbatim into the book, but tweaked it a little bit to be Elma's voice. Actually, all four books technically have pieces that are written by actual astronauts. So you got the question about getting back into Elma's voice. So I reread them, but I also listened to my own audiobook narration because I was also going to have to re-narrate in her voice as well and remember what all of the characters sounded like. It was fairly easy to get back into her. The hardest part is making sure that I'm having her continue to evolve as a character, because the character that she winds up in Lady Astronaut of Mars, I have a trajectory for her that I have to get her to. I've been working on a short story for the short story collection, which takes place between Calculating Stars and Faded Sky. And that one has been the one that's been the hardest because I feel like I actually have to go and reread Calculate, or at least the tail end of Calculating Stars again, because Elma does not have the confidence that she has at the end of these novels, and trying to remember what her relationship with Parker is like before she goes on the Mars mission. Trying to get back into there is fun. Thank you for saying that you liked my Glasgow Worldcon presentation in character as Elma. What was one of your favorite things to research for this series? Anytime I had an excuse to go to NASA, I was extremely excited about this. It just never got old. It never gets old. Anytime. I'm like, I've seen this thing before. I would like to see it again. Thank you, please. I think Neutral Buoyancy Lab was probably one of my favorite things. One of the other things was in between writing these and the first two books, I enjoy being in an aircraft that someone else is flying. And I had pilots working with me, but I started taking flying lessons. That's probably the most fun research because I was learning to fly. I only got to 12 hours and then the pandemic hit. And at the time, we didn't know how things were being transmitted. And the aircraft is so tiny. It's like, here's my shoulder, here's your shoulder. You're in a very, very tiny box. But now I would have been fine because it's a little drafty. It's definitely not sealed. Those are probably those kinds of hands-on things are some of my favorite things. In terms of just research, book research, learning about all of the women in space. Elsie, who has left, we got Elsie after I wrote Calculating Stars, and she is named after Elsie McGill, Queen of the Hurricanes, who was the first woman to get an engineering degree, an aerospace engineering degree. She got a master's, I believe a PhD as well. But she designed the assembly line process for assembling the Hurricane airplane, which was hugely instrumental in World War II because up to that point, all airplanes were bespoke. So they all had the same design, but if something broke, because each piece had been individually crafted, you couldn't just swap something out. And so she came up with this assembly line process. There's actually a comic book about her. So Elsie is named after her. So many questions about the bag. Whose horrifying idea was that, and why did you decide to include it in the book? The bag is a real thing that someone thinks is a good idea to deal with a dead body in space. So you put someone in the bag, in an airlock, and you freeze dry them. And then for that, they had a robotic arm that would do the shaking. But I was like, at this stage in technology, I was like, how can I make this worse, basically? But also that I didn't it didn't make sense to me for them to have packed a robotic arm with them just in case of burial in space. Their idea is that you do that and you compress them down into a tiny cube, and then you can store the cube until you can get back to Earth and inter them. The actual thing that they do, which is the burial at space, aside from the things that happen in the book because of that, is actually a really terrible plan. Because what you've just done is put an impact object in your shipping lane. So it's a really bad idea. Don't do it. Why did I decide to include it in the book? Because I'm awful and I'm a writer. I'm mean, I'm cruel, I enjoy torturing you. That is my job. I want you to have big feelings, and whew, if I was going to have big feelings reading about it, so were you.
What would be your favorite cut scenes that didn't make it in?
Do you want me to read one? I can't remember what cut scenes there were calculating stars, but I have a cut scene from Relentless Moon that I really liked. It just was sending the book in entirely the wrong direction. But generally speaking, when I cut things, it is due to length, or I start writing it and then realize that I've spun the manuscript in the wrong direction. Most of the time I get to reuse a scene. And this one from Relentless Moon, there was just no way to reuse it. I just opened the Scrivener file, and I'm actually going to go ahead and share screen, because I feel like there are some people who are writers, and it would be helpful for you to see how many things I throw away. Because it's really easy to think that it springs forth from the head. But this is my scraps folder. These are just sentences I've got in here that I didn't use. Like, this thing about Stetson and it being his favorite hat, like that didn't wind up in the book. But we've got all of these, like these are all things that I decided to cut. Smart things that Nicole and the gang should be doing. So sometimes it's just brainstorming. But all of this is stuff that I cut. Is way farther back than I thought it was.
Nicole and kitchen duty sounds like a bad combo.
Yeah, she did not like it. Yeah. I knew that this scene needed to end quickly. I was having problems with this scene. I knew that it's not so much I knew this scene needed to end quickly. I needed to end the scene, and I was having problems getting out of it, because what I really wanted from the scene was just for Kenneth and Nicole it was there to kind of demonstrate the strain on their relationship. And so I'm like, okay, well, how do I end it? And so I'm like, a tornado siren. So I have not looked at this in years. A tornado siren split the air. Someone mumbled on for a few syllables longer. Throughout the sanctuary, scattered voices began to rise in consternation. On the one hand, it was probably a false alarm. On the other, there weren't train tracks outside the church, and I was hearing a train. The 21111 is probably Elsie standing on the keyboard. I put the hymnal down and looked to the front. Surely the pastor had a plan for a tornado during services. He stood, mouth hanging open. Well, crap. He wasn't from Kansas. I turned to Kenneth. The fellowship hall is in the basement. He gave a quick nod. Ushers for crowd control. Resting a hand on the end of the pew, Kenneth climbed up to stand on the red velvet cushion. Somewhere, a church lady was having a heart attack and not about the tornado. Kenneth turned on his orator's voice. Ladies and gentlemen, let us proceed in an orderly fashion to the fellowship hall in the basement. Ushers, please guide pews to all available paths to the basement. Here's the secret. Kenneth was completely calm and projected an air of competence. More than being a good plan, he set an example of calm. Too often, people rush into a situation and project urgency, which then makes people tense, and in this situation would have led to panic. As it was, people flocked toward the exits in the orderly fashion my husband had called for. I ran contingency scenarios in my head anyway. The pews were oak and bolted to the floor. Sheltering in place under them was an option. Outside the stained glass, the sound of a train got louder with each second. There were still a good 50 people in the sanctuary. And then the idea there was by this point, I knew that I was heading the wrong direction. But the remainder of what I had planned was that in the storm cellar, someone confronts Nicole and Kenneth, blaming the weather on all of the rocket launches. They're a climate change denier and a person who thinks they should spend resources on the planet, not on space colony. Kenneth tells Nicole to go to Brazil. And then later at a scene on the moon where Nicole learns that he's had a heart attack. No, wait, not a heart attack because I need him to be healthy for the presidential run later. Something involving his health, though. In a previous scene, set up that the weather is unpleasant. I've got all of this stuff that was for a direction that the novel never went. And as you can see, I was also trying to figure it out. This novel I had outlined. I knew the basic directions that I was going, but there were also pieces of it that I was still discovering as I went. I like that scene. There's another one where I ended this same church scene with FBI agents arriving because someone was killing astronauts on Earth. And then I was like, but she would never go to the moon at that point. She would, and also that's a stupid plan for the terrorists. So I cut that scene, but it's actually like two really good scenes that I love. There's a question that has been DM'd to me to avoid spoilers. I'm going to include the things that I don't mind being spoiled. So I talked a bit about this in the About the History notes, which is how I approached Cam's character and the decision to include someone who is transgender with all the limitations and how that could be represented through Elma and Faded Sky. So I firmly believe that people should just be allowed to be in a story without being a plot point. And I have tried to represent characters in kind of the balance of the people that I know in my own life. And so it seems unrealistic to me that there wouldn't be people who are transgender in the space program at that scale, even if here on Earth, I suspect here on Earth that we have people who are non-binary that just can't express that, and because they want to go into space, and it's so much of it is military driven and prejudices that exist here, especially now. I knew that I wanted that. And so from the moment I had Cam on the page, I knew that Cam was non-binary. I did not know when I started writing, I hadn't made a decision yet, if Cam was non-binary or trans. And talking to a friend of mine who's non-binary, they were like, you have to make that decision. Leaving that for the reader is not, it's like, you need to know that because the character would know that. And I was like, they were correct. So that changed the way I was writing Cam, and that's why they were correct. But it did mean that I could not have, because I didn't want it to be a plot point, I couldn't have a point where I was going to bring it out in Faded Sky, which meant that I needed to misgender Cam because it's in Elmo's POV. I needed to misgender Cam all the way through, which was distressing for me. And I think that's part of the reason that I was avoiding that decision earlier, because I knew that was what I was going to have to do. I will say that in Martian Contingency, without going in, I mean, I honestly do not mind people knowing that I'm going to do this now. I would have before all of the transgender rolling back bullshit prosecution, oppression, erasure crimes are being done. Before that, I would have been like, oh yeah, no, I want this to be a secret. But now I'm like, no. We get to call Cam he, him in Martian Contingency. Not at the beginning, but when you read the book, I do not use a pronoun for Cam until I get to the point that I can use the correct pronouns. I am kind of hoping the book gets banned for it. I would feel like I've done my job here at this point. I don't want to live in a world where that is true, but this isn't the first time that I've done this. Valor and Vanity, there's a puppeteer character who is trans. And I put markers in, but no one, like, unless I tell you to look for them, it's not as clear. So I wanted to be much clearer with Cam. So the decision to include Cam was just, I believe that someone would be there. And I can't actually talk about it was a structural thing. Because I did not, the moment I had Elma make that discovery, it was going to become the nice white lady figures out her feelings about non-binary. And I was like, that's not the story that I want to tell. I just want Cam to be awesome. And he is. He's awesome. Did I hope or expect to be able to do that when I first introduced his character? No. So I thought this was going to be a single standalone book. And this I thought was going to be part 3. So part 1, 2, and 3, I thought this was going to be just one thing. And structurally, it wasn't going to work. So I split it off. I had no idea that I was going to get to write other books because we had contracted for one standalone thing. So I had no idea that I would be able to get to do that later when I introduced Cam. I'm going to read this out loud because it's very kind. I often call these books the perfect science fiction novels. Thank you. Thank you. In part because I love social science fiction and you combine hard science and social science. Thank you. Elma's development. Interesting thing here. You've spelled it ALMA, which tells me that you listen to me in audio. And it is fascinating to me that everybody who has heard this in audio spells it that way, but it's spelled ELMA. And I think it's because there is a correction for her Southern accent. That's my guess, or it may just be that Alma is a more common name than Elma. Elma's development is definitely one of those things, the growth from being a brilliant and accomplished woman who only needs the respect of her family to being a brilliant and accomplished woman of her times in the public eye. Oh, this is just a compliment. I was reading this and I was like, there's a question. No, you're just being nice. Thank you. Okay. So far, there has been no real use of the bag, right? Correct. It is a design. I don't know if I think they have built a prototype and done this with like pieces of fruit or lab animals probably, but no real use of the bag. I cannot imagine. I think the bag is really for deployment, like if they're going to Mars and they have to figure out what to do. You've mentioned in the past how all of your characters have ADHD, not on purpose. Not on purpose. That's not an on purpose thing. I'm curious how that manifests for Elma. I'm like, in hindsight, all of my characters actually have ADHD, is that I will often talk about a character that has 2 trains of thought that collide in her head, or like 5 things pop up and she couldn't figure out which one to say next, which I thought was the way everybody's brain works, and apparently it is not. So that's the kind of thing. But that I think that manifests probably in every character in the book, except maybe Nicole. Did the scene where Elma throws chocolate all over her crewmates come from personal experience? If you count cats as crewmates. About a different book, we recently gave Molly on the Moon to a tiny human who was enthralled with the illustrations, and her adults loved the story too. Yay! Thank you. It makes me very happy. Would you ever consider doing a deluxe anniversary edition and include some of the cutscenes that were cut solely based on length, but not storyline? This is the kind of thing that's like, I would love to do that, but that's not something. I guess I could do a Kickstarter for that. But at this point, like, I wouldn't put the scenes back where I cut them, because I bridged past that. And when I cut for length, it is because generally speaking, it is because the novel is so long that it sags under its own weight, and that it gets in the way of the story that I actually want to tell. The scenes that I cut are scenes that don't need to be there, and especially after I've cut them. Like Relentless Moon, I think when I finished it was 160 or 180,000 words. I think it was 160. It was really, really long. And I cut it down to 1. And I cannot think of anything that I pulled out of Relentless Moon that I want to put back. A deluxe edition with annotations or commentary? You can kind of get this, not a deluxe edition, but you can kind of get this when I narrated Relentless Moon, we didn't take it down, even though I think we talked about doing it. But on my YouTube channel, you can watch me narrate Relentless Moon, and I'm doing commentary all the way through it. Is there any small historical or scientific detail in The Faded Sky that you wish more readers noticed? So this is, I don't know how to answer that. First of all, because I don't remember, like, you all have read these books more recently than I have. But the second thing is that I rarely get to talk to readers about the books in depth. So I don't actually know what people notice and they don't notice. I can tell you that almost all of the I was just flipping through the almost all of the newspaper articles are real. So racial incidents at issue in UN that happened in 1962. That's chapter 9. Crew of Mars expedition training in space, that did not happen. I made that one up. What kind of men are they? That is Buzz Aldrin's interview that I gave to Stetson Parker. I was just scrolling through to see if I could spot anything. The thing about disaster effects found to persist was a real article, and it's one that I keep thinking about. Scientists did a study of people who've survived disasters. And so I have been thinking about that during pandemic, but I've also been thinking about it with everyone in LA. It's like, even if your house was not hit, the traumatic effects of that apparently linger for years. And people can wind up feeling hostility and depression and all of these things like a decade after they still feel the effects. What cool tidbits and scraps about Judaism did you collect which didn't make it into the book? I love the loophole Elma uses to sit Shiva in the bedroom and calculating stars. The Pyrex controversy. Okay, so when you are dealing with, remember, when I'm answering this question, I am not Jewish. But when you're dealing with eating, you'll use glass plates if you don't want to have multiple dishes for meat and for dairy. Because glass does not, using my words, doesn't absorb the taint of things. It's inert. Feel free to correct me if I'm just using funky language for it. Let me struggle. Okay, great. Yeah, Pyrex can go in the oven. So the question is it earthenware or is it glass? So depending on where you stand on the controversy, either Pyrex is glass, and if I want to make something for someone who keeps kosher, I can use a Pyrex dish and not have to worry about it. But if you're on the other side and you're like, no, it's earthenware, it's not glass. If you think it's not glass, then I cannot use it because who knows what I have put in it previously. Who's the hardest character to narrate and why? Vanderbilt de Beers, because a South African accent is just difficult. It's not one I hear as much, and it wasn't one that I previously had in my repertoire. So that was the one that was the hardest. I was going to ask a question about diversity in this series and was struggling as to how to phrase it without nudging you hard to talk about something you might not have wanted to. I am fine to talk about diversity. It's interesting to me and telling, I think, about the state of our industry that people talk about the diversity in these books and that these books are dealing with racism and sexism and ableism, and my perspective on them is that what I'm doing is I am writing about people who are there and the ways that they have to move through the world. And what I'm doing that is unusual is that I am not ignoring it. But I'm not sitting down to consciously write books that are diverse. I'm writing books about the people who would be there. One of the things that I ran across when I was doing research for calculating stars, I always start by looking for my research. I always immediately start looking for the women, the queer folk, the POC, the folks with disabilities. I always start and go looking because I know that they're there and I know that those stories are never forefronted. And in the process, I found a book called Rise of the Rocket Girls, which was about women in computing at Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And in the 1940s, JPL had a policy that when during the interview process, you were asked, how do you feel about working with Black people? And if you hesitated or said that you were not comfortable, they did not hire you because they had Black people, they had Chinese people, they had people from all over the place working for them. And if you couldn't get along with them, they didn't want you in their ecosystem. And that's in the 1940s. But when we look at the space program, it's like when you look at media depiction of the space program, you look at media depiction of the space program, until Hidden Figures came along, it was all white people all the time. When you look at actual photos of the space program, that is not true. So I just don't ignore them.
I also appreciated what could have almost been a throwaway line, but saying having a Quaker as a president really impacted hiring practices. I mean, and I know that was it could sound like a throwaway line.
Yeah, I looked at line of succession until I found somebody that I thought would do the things that I needed them to do.
He's
Or at least,
real? I thought he was just a made up
no,
character.
he's real. And there's not enough biography about him for people to, like somebody who knew him would be able to contradict me, but he's not well enough known figure. The one piece about it that does not make sense is that is who was the Secretary of Agriculture in real life, but in my universe, Dewey won, and it doesn't make sense that he would have picked the same Secretary of Agriculture. So I'm just like, yeah, he was reaching across the aisle. I looked at line of succession, who was likely to have been who I and so when I saw that he was a Quaker, I'm like, there we go. And agriculture, I'm like, you would get this. He had farming in his background, so I'm like, you would understand this. So that's why I was like, he was out of town. Is there a process you use to find sensitivity readers that aren't your friends or acquaintances? A lot of times I will, depending on the topic, I'll either just put out a feeler online, like on Blue Sky, or it's in the before times, or I will, sometimes I will email someone and say, I read your article about this. I am working on a novel. I'm happy to pay you an honorarium, depending on how much of their time I need. Or I'll ask friends of friends, like when you get to the Martian Contingency, there's a character who's Citizen Potawatomi, which is one of the Native American tribes. And I have a friend who's a Citizen Potawatomi, and I asked her if she could put me in touch with anyone that would be willing to be sensitivity readers for this. And so it's crowdsourcing, and it varies. And sometimes I just have a conversation. Sometimes I sign them up to read just those scenes. And sometimes I pay a stipend for them to be with me for the whole book. Like in Of Noble Family, in the Glamorous Histories universe, it's set in Antigua, and I wanted characters to be speaking the dialect, the Antiguan dialect. And I was like, there's no planet or universe in which I write that and write it well. And so I contacted an Antiguan writer and editor and hired her and gave her a per page rate to go through the whole book and to let me know any missed opportunities, anything that just struck her as, well, that's just weird. And then she rewrote all of the Antiguan dialect. Did you have to get the permission of the Mr. Rogers estate to use him? No. no, when you're referencing a public figure like that, you don't have to. Where did I use Mr. Rogers? Do you mean Mr. Wizard? Yes. No, no, I didn't have to, did
Yep,
not.
Mr. Wizard. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I was like, wait, did I do that? That doesn't seem right on the timeline. No, Mr. Wizard. Yeah, you for a public figure like that, you don't have to do that. I try when I use real people, I try really hard to make sure that, especially if they are likely to have family still alive or they are still alive. Like if they are still alive, I probably would. Actually, I can't remember if he is alive or not. Anyway, point being, I try really hard to make sure that I am not having them give opinions. Because I don't want to misrepresent their feelings about things, because I know that people will often internalize stories and will remember fiction as if it is history. And where possible, I try to have it be things that they've actually said. I did not look up interviews for him. I didn't get rigorous with him. I just made sure that I was careful about him not really expressing opinions. I will say that one of the things when I was watching the original Mr. Wizard, not the reboot that was, I think, in the 80s, one of the things that really struck me was how the girls and boys who were coming on were not doing gendered science. And that later science programs would be like, and now we're going to learn about the science of makeup. And that the girl often was the one who was more scientifically inclined than the boy. But as I understand it, it was a mix of script and not script. So it was just very interesting. They're great. But the girls are, here's my floofy little skirt and my little cardigan and the little bows, and let's plug these together and create electricity. It's great. We have a non-book question, which I'm delighted to take, which is about Elsie, who is one of my favorite topics. So I'm really curious how you even began training Elsie to talk. I think my cat is smart enough, but therefore he is untrainable. So Elsie is the smartest cat that has ever been in my life. I think she's given up on me and gone upstairs. It took her 6 months before she began to talk. And in hindsight, it's because of my approach. And one of the mistakes that I made was that I gave my starting word for her was a word that she didn't have any reason to want to learn, which was outside. It was open, actually. The recommendation, which was based on dogs, was that you start with outside. We now know that this is actually not a great starting word, because as soon as they hit that button, they move away from the button board, because the reward for it is to leave the button board. So it was just constant modeling and occasionally letting her get a little bit frustrated because I was not responding to the very clear communication that we had before, which is that she would stand on her hind legs and bat the doorknob, and that would tell me that she wanted the door open. Eventually, I did target training with her, which is you have a button. If you Google Justin Bieber the cat and target training, there's a great training video, which is what I used. But you have the button, you put a little clear glass bowl over it. Actually, first you put the clear glass bowl over a treat, and they bat the bowl to try to get to the treat. You pick the button up and you give them the treat, and then you gradually get them to the point where they're touching the bowl, and then the button is under the bowl, and so they touch the bowl, and then you give them a treat separately, and then you remove the bowl, and then touch the button, and they get the treat, and the button says treat. So I did that with Guppy, and Guppy started using buttons day one. But everything else, that's the mechanic of pushing the button, because it is unnatural motion. Once they understand that, everything else is modeling, and you can start doing the modeling before you put the buttons down. So, like if I wanted to, if I snuggle. So if we are snuggling, I'm like, oh, snuggle, snuggle, we are snuggle. We snuggle. Mary, Robinette, Elsie, snuggle now, snuggle. Want snuggle? Oh, snuggle now. You just use the word and you're consistent in what that label is. You can vary the words that go around it, and it's actually good for them to do that. But you just keep using that word and modeling it. And then when you give them the button, you model it with the button. And if you've already taught them what the word is, generally they start using the button pretty fast. So your smart cat, often they are difficult to train, but it's only the button training. Everything else is teaching. And it's about finding things that are high value to them that they do not have a good way to communicate to you. What is my process for finding the newspaper headlines and clips? I have a subscription to the New York Times. I go into their Times archive, and I put in a date range. I try to pick clippings for the most part. If it's not a space clipping, I try to pick clippings from the time that I'm in. A lot of the things that are in there happened on the date that is the date that it happened on. Not all of them. Sometimes I move things. Sometimes I know that it's like, oh, I need a disaster of some sort and I need it to happen. So I look for something in these years. And the reason I look for it in those years is because reporting styles change. So I find something, and I try to find something that is longer so that I can use a clip from it instead of taking an entire one, so that I'm just excerpting instead of using someone's entire thing. Every now and then it's like, oh, this is a 1-paragraph article that is really perfect and I'm going to use it. But most of those actually wind up getting changes. So it's like, I'm skirting the fair use line. I think it's fair use, but hopefully I'm crediting them. What's your favorite research memory for the Lady Astronaut series besides the Neutral Buoyancy Lab? There's a line in Faded Sky. So there was a point in my life where I was live tweeting spacewalks. And sometimes I'd hear an astronaut say something and I didn't know what it was. So I would text an astronaut, which I can do now, which is cool. And I think this one was actually on the phone. Asked an astronaut, what does WIF stand for? WIF. And the answer that I got back was widget interface, forget about it. And they said that at a certain point, the acronyms just become the name and couldn't actually remember what it was for, what it meant. And so I was like, I'm going to put that verbatim in the book. And I did. Thank you all so much for joining me. I look forward to having the Martian Contingency in your hands. Bye, everybody.